The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with quiet conversations as delegates from dozens of species took their seats. The massive chamber stretched high above them, its walls covered in shifting patterns of light that represented the combined knowledge of 1,000 worlds. At the center of it all stood a simple podium where speakers would address the greatest governing body in known space. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked slowly toward that podium, her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and exotic armor worn by the other delegates. She carried a single data pad in her hands, and her face showed no emotion as she approached the speaker's platform. Behind her, the human delegation consisted of only 3 other people, making them the smallest group in the massive hall. As Chen reached the podium, a wave of amused whispers spread through the chamber. The tall, blue-skinned Zephyrians leaned toward each other, their crystalline voices creating musical tones of laughter. The insect-like Thrakari clicked their mandibles in what passed for chuckling among their species. Even the usually serious Corvan delegates allowed themselves small smiles as they watched the human prepare to speak. Ambassador Zek Thara of the Hegemony Coalition rose from his ornate chair, his silver skin gleaming under the chamber's lights. His forearms moved gracefully as he gestured toward Chen, and when he spoke, his voice carried easily through the hall without any need for amplification. Honored members of the council, Zek Thara began, his tone already carrying a hint of amusement. We gather today to hear yet another proposal from our newest members. The humans, in their infinite wisdom, have brought us what they consider an urgent matter requiring our immediate attention. More laughter rippled through the chamber. The humans had been part of the Galactic Council for less than 200 years, making them practically infants compared to civilizations that had been traveling between stars for millennia. In that time, they had submitted dozens of proposals that the older species considered naive or unnecessary. Most were politely rejected after brief discussions. Chen stepped up to the podium and activated the chamber's translation system. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear, showing none of the nervousness that many expected from such a young species addressing their betters. Honored delegates, she began, I come before you today with a formal request from the United Earth government. We ask that this council immediately implement a complete ban on human military participation in the ongoing conflict against the Vorthan Rebellion. The laughter that had been brewing in the chamber suddenly erupted into open amusement. General Vextar of the Hegemony military actually slapped his knee with one of his 4 hands, his bark-like skin crackling with the motion. Several delegates didn't even bother to hide their grins as they turned to their neighbors to share jokes in their native languages. Did she say ban human participation? Asked Ambassador Quill of the Centauri Federation, his feathered crest ruffling with barely contained laughter. Are the humans finally admitting they cannot handle real warfare? The Vorthan Rebellion had been raging for 3 standard years across the Outer Rim territories. The Vorthans, a proud warrior species, had declared independence from the Galactic Council after a dispute over mining rights on their homeworld. What started as a political disagreement had escalated into a full-scale war when Vorthan extremists began attacking shipping lanes and civilian stations. The Council's response had been swift and overwhelming. The Hegemony Coalition, the military arm of galactic civilization, had deployed hundreds of ships and thousands of troops to crush the rebellion. Most council members expected the conflict to end within months, but the Vorthans had proven surprisingly resilient, using guerrilla tactics and their knowledge of the Outer Rim's asteroid fields to avoid direct confrontation. Humans had been involved in the conflict from the beginning, but their contribution was considered minimal at best. Earth could field perhaps 50 warships compared to the Hegemony's thousands. Human weapons were crude projectile launchers and primitive missiles, laughably outdated compared to the energy weapons and gravitic shields used by more advanced species. Most council members viewed human participation as a gesture of goodwill, rather than any meaningful military contribution. Perhaps, suggested Commander Thys of the Aquatic Alliance, her translator converting her underwater speech patterns into standard galactic. The humans have finally realized that their primitive weapons are more dangerous to themselves than to the enemy. This comment brought fresh waves of laughter from the assembled delegates. Stories of human military mishaps had become popular entertainment in certain circles. There was the incident where a human ship had accidentally fired on its own supply convoy because their targeting systems couldn't distinguish between friendly and enemy vessels. Another tale told of human soldiers who had become lost on a simple reconnaissance mission and wandered around an empty planet for 3 weeks before being rescued. Chen waited patiently for the laughter to die down, her expression never changing. She had heard all these stories before, and she knew that many of them were true. Humans were new to interstellar warfare, and they had made mistakes. But what the Council didn't know was that humans learned from their mistakes in ways that other species didn't seem to understand. "I can see that the Council finds our request amusing," Chen said once the chamber had quieted. "Perhaps you would like to hear our reasoning before making your decision." "By all means," said Zekthara, settling back in his chair with the air of someone preparing to be entertained. "Please enlighten us as to why the mighty human military wishes to retreat from a conflict they are already losing." Chen activated her datapad, and a holographic display appeared above the podium. It showed a star map of the Outer Rim territories, with red markers indicating known Vorthon positions, and blue markers showing Council forces. The human positions were marked in green, and there were surprisingly few of them scattered across the vast region. 3 months ago, Chen began, High Command deployed the 7th Infantry Battalion to assist hegemony forces in what was classified as a minor skirmish on Kepler 442b. The operation was expected to last 48 hours and result in the capture of a small Vorthon supply depot. The display zoomed in on a small yellow star system near the edge of the conflict zone. Several delegates leaned forward with interest, curious to hear about another human military failure. The official report listed the outcome as a tactical withdrawal, Chen continued. All human personnel were successfully evacuated with minimal casualties. The hegemony command structure expressed satisfaction with human performance and recommended continued cooperation in future operations. Yes, interrupted General Vextar impatiently. We are all familiar with military euphemisms. Your forces retreated after encountering real resistance. What does this have to do with your current request? Chen looked directly at the general, and for the first time since entering the chamber, her expression showed something other than calm neutrality. For just a moment, there was something in her eyes that made the large alien shift uncomfortably in his seat. "General," she said quietly, "I think there may have been some miscommunication in the reports you received. The 7th Infantry accomplished their mission objectives within the specified time frame. They captured the supply depot, eliminated all Vorthon resistance in the area, and secured valuable intelligence regarding enemy positions and capabilities." The chamber fell silent as delegates processed this information. If the humans had actually succeeded in their mission, why were they asking to be banned from future operations? "Then why?" asked Ambassador Thys slowly. "Do you wish to withdraw from the conflict?" Chen looked around the chamber, her gaze touching on each delegate in turn. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet that the translation systems had to amplify it for everyone to hear. "Because," she said, "we're not sure the galaxy is ready to see what humans become when someone forces us to fight a real war." The laughter had completely died now, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that stretched across the Great Hall. 3 weeks after the Galactic Council's rejection of the human military ban, Supreme Commander Zarthok stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching as his massive fleet prepared for the largest offensive operation of the war. Through the bridge's transparent aluminum windows, he could see the sleek forms of 200 hegemony warships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming like polished silver against the starfield. The sight filled him with pride and confidence. Each ship represented the pinnacle of galactic military technology, equipped with plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid-sized targets and shield generators, powerful enough to deflect the energy output of a small star. The crews manning these vessels were the elite of hegemony society, trained from birth in the arts of war and conquest. "Status report," Zarthok commanded, his 4 arms working efficiently at different control stations, while his primary eyes remained focused on the tactical display floating before him. "All ships report ready for hyperspace jump." "Supreme Commander," replied his aide, a young officer whose silver skin bore the ritual scars of military service. 50,000 shock troopers are aboard the assault carriers, fully equipped and eager for battle. Intelligence confirms minimal resistance expected at the target. Zarthok nodded with satisfaction. Their destination was Zerion Prime, a mining world deep in Vorthon territory that had become a symbol of the rebellion's defiance. The planet's extensive crystal caves provided perfect hiding spots for guerrilla fighters, and its mineral wealth funded much of the Vorthon war effort. Taking Xerion Prime would deal a crushing blow to the rebellion and demonstrate the futility of opposing the Galactic Council's authority. According to intelligence reports, the planet was defended by fewer than 3,000 Vorthon fighters, armed with outdated weapons and limited supplies. They had been cut off from reinforcements for months and were believed to be on the verge of surrender. The hegemony expected this to be less of a battle and more of a mop-up operation. "Any word from our human observers?" Zarthok asked, though he didn't really care about the answer. The Council had insisted that human military observers be included in the operation as part of their ongoing learning experience in modern warfare. The Supreme Commander viewed them as nuisances at best, but orders were orders. "The human battalion reports that they are maintaining position in the outer system, ready to observe and document the operation as requested," his aide replied. "They have made no request for direct participation in the assault." Zarthok chuckled, a sound like grinding metal that passed for amusement among his species. Wise of them. Perhaps watching a real military operation will teach them something about how wars are actually fought. The bridge crew shared his amusement. Stories of human military incompetence had become legendary throughout the hegemony forces. Their primitive kinetic weapons, their reliance on chemical explosives, their crude armor that couldn't even stop a basic plasma bolt. It all seemed like something from the dark ages of galactic civilization. Meanwhile, in her quarters aboard the diplomatic station orbiting the neutral world of Haven, Ambassador Sarah Chen received an encrypted transmission from Earth Command. The holographic display showed Admiral Morrison, a stern-faced woman whose gray hair and lined features spoke of decades spent in Earth's military service. "Sarah," the Admiral began without preamble, "we've intercepted hegemony communications regarding their Xerion Prime operation. They're going in with overwhelming force against a population that includes significant numbers of civilians." Chen nodded grimly. She had expected this. The hegemony's approach to warfare was effective but brutal, designed to crush resistance through displays of overwhelming power rather than precise tactical strikes. In their view, civilian casualties were simply the price of ending conflicts quickly. "What's the status of our people in the area?" Chen asked. "The 7th Infantry is maintaining observation position as ordered," Morrison replied. "Officially, they're there to learn hegemony tactics and gather intelligence for future cooperation. Sergeant Major Reeves is commanding the unit personally." Chen knew Reeves by reputation, a veteran of Earth's colonial wars who had earned his rank through 2 decades of fighting in the outer colonies. He was exactly the kind of soldier who would understand the importance of what they might witness on Xerion Prime, and exactly the kind of man who would be deeply affected by what the hegemony was planning to do. "Admiral," Chen said carefully, "are we certain about the intelligence regarding Vorthon civilian populations on Xerion Prime?" Morrison's expression darkened. "Confirmed through 3 separate sources. The Vorthons evacuated their military families to Xerion Prime months ago, thinking the planet's cave systems would protect them. There are an estimated 50,000 non-combatants down there, including children." The 2 women sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the implications. The hegemony's standard operating procedure didn't distinguish between military and civilian targets when dealing with rebellious populations. To them, anyone who supported the rebellion, even passively, was a legitimate target. "Should we extract our people before the operation begins?" Morrison asked. Chen considered this carefully. Removing human observers now would raise questions and might alert the hegemony to Earth's true concerns about the operation. More importantly, if the hegemony committed the atrocities that both women suspected were coming, someone needed to document what happened. Negative, Chen finally decided. "But Admiral, make sure our people understand what they're likely to see, and make absolutely certain they record everything." Back aboard the Eternal Dominion, Supreme Commander Zarthok received confirmation that all ships were ready for the hyperspace jump to Xerion Prime. The operation had been planned down to the smallest detail. First, orbital bombardment would eliminate any surface defenses and drive the Vorthons deeper into their cave systems. Then assault ships would deploy shock troopers directly into the cave entrances, where superior hegemony technology and training would quickly overwhelm the primitive defenders. "Supreme Commander," reported his tactical officer, "we have final authorization from Hegemony Command. All Council species have approved the operation, and we are cleared to use any necessary force to secure the objective." Zarthok smiled, his sharp teeth gleaming in the bridge's blue lighting. Any necessary force was code for giving field commanders complete discretion in how they handled resistance. It meant that if civilians got in the way, if prisoners became inconvenient, if the local population needed to be taught a lesson about the cost of rebellion, the field commanders were free to act as they saw fit. "Excellent," he said, settling into his command chair as the hyperspace engines began to charge. "Signal all ships. We jump in 60 seconds. As the countdown began, Zarthok felt the familiar thrill of approaching battle. This operation would be remembered as the moment the Vorthon rebellion finally died, crushed under the weight of superior firepower and military discipline. The surviving Vorthons would serve as an example to any other species that might consider challenging the established order. The hyperspace jump activated with a flash of twisted light, and 200 hegemony warships vanished from normal space, carrying 50,000 soldiers toward what their commanders believed would be an easy victory. None of them had any idea that they were flying toward something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. In the observation post hidden among the asteroids of Xerion Prime's outer system, Sergeant Major Jack Reeves watched the massive hegemony fleet emerge from hyperspace and begin moving toward the planet. His 37 soldiers were spread throughout the asteroid field, their stealth-equipped ships virtually undetectable against the background radiation of space. "Contact Earth Command," Reeves ordered his communications specialist. "Tell them the hegemony has arrived and is beginning their approach. Estimated time to surface engagement is 6 hours," he paused, watching the alien warships form their attack formation with mechanical precision. "And tell them," he added quietly, "that we're about to see what happens when someone gives the hegemony permission to do whatever they think is necessary." Reeves had fought in enough wars to recognize the signs of an operation where civilian casualties weren't just acceptable but expected. What he didn't know yet was that he and his soldiers were about to witness something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, and provide the justification for humanity to show the galaxy exactly what they were capable of when someone crossed the line. Sergeant Major Jack Reeves pressed himself against the crystalline wall of the canyon, his advanced optics zooming in on the hegemony landing zone 3 kilometers away. The rocky landscape of Xerion Prime stretched before him, a maze of purple crystal formations and deep canyons that had been carved by centuries of mining operations. What should have been a beautiful alien landscape was now about to become a battlefield. His team of 37 soldiers was scattered throughout the canyon system, each one equipped with the latest human stealth gear and recording equipment. They had been on Xerion Prime for 2 weeks, officially gathering intelligence about Vorthon defensive positions. Unofficially, they were about to document something that would change everything humanity thought they knew about their galactic neighbors, orbital. "Bombardment beginning in 30 seconds, whispered Corporal Martinez through the comm system, her voice tight with tension. From her position on a ridge overlooking the main Vorthon settlement, she had a clear view of the energy weapons charging on the hegemony ships hanging in the sky like silver death. Reeves adjusted his recording equipment, making sure every camera and sensor was functioning properly. Earth Command had been very specific about their mission requirements: document everything, interfere with nothing, and make sure the evidence was transmitted back to Earth in real time through quantum burst communications. The first energy beam lanced down from orbit like a spear of pure light, striking the center of New Kythera, the largest Vorthon settlement on the planet. The blast vaporized a city block in an instant, turning buildings and everything in them into superheated plasma. More beams followed, systematically destroying anything that might contain weapons or serve as a defensive position. But as Reeves watched through his enhanced optics, he realized the bombardment wasn't targeting military installations. The beams were hitting schools, hospitals, residential areas, anywhere that large numbers of Vorthons might be taking shelter. Within minutes, the thriving settlement of 50,000 beings had been reduced to smoking craters and melted crystal. "Jesus Christ," muttered Private Collins from his position near the mining complex. "They're not just hitting military targets. They're hitting everything." Through his scope, Reeves could see Vorthon civilians running from the bombardment, carrying their children and trying to reach the safety of the deep caves that honeycombed the planet's surface. Most of them never made it. The energy beams were too accurate, too widespread, and too merciless. 20 minutes later, the orbital bombardment stopped, leaving the surface of Xerion Prime looking like a moonscape of craters and cooling glass. Then came the dropships. Hundreds of sleek hegemony transports that descended through the smoke and dust to disgorge their cargo of shock troopers onto the devastated landscape. Reeves had studied hegemony military doctrine extensively during his years of service, but he had never seen it implemented with such brutal efficiency. The shock troopers didn't advance like soldiers seeking to capture territory. They moved like exterminators, clearing out an infestation. The first group of survivors they encountered was a family of Vorthans who had emerged from a collapsed building, carrying an injured child between them. The hegemony soldiers didn't even pause to question them or demand surrender. They simply opened fire with their plasma rifles, cutting down the entire family in seconds before moving on to the next target. "Are we recording this?" asked Sergeant Williams, his voice barely audible through the comm. "Every second," Reeves confirmed, though his hands were shaking as he operated the camera controls. He had seen combat on a dozen worlds, witnessed the aftermath of bombing runs and artillery strikes, but nothing had prepared him for the systematic nature of what he was watching. The hegemony forces weren't just killing combatants, they were eliminating anyone who might potentially support the rebellion in the future. This included not just adult Vorthans, but their children, their elderly, anyone who couldn't possibly pose a military threat. From her position overlooking the medical center, Private Martinez watched through her scope as hegemony soldiers methodically executed wounded Vorthans who had been receiving treatment when the bombardment began. Doctors and nurses who tried to protect their patients were gunned down without mercy. When a group of Vorthan children emerged from a basement shelter carrying improvised white flags, the hegemony troops shot them down like targets at a practice range. "Sarge," Martinez whispered into her comm, I need to do something. We can't just watch this." "Hold position," Reeves ordered, though every instinct in his body was screaming at him to intervene. "Those are direct orders from Earth Command. We observe and record only." But even as he gave the order, Reeves understood why Earth Command had insisted on these restrictions. What they were witnessing wasn't warfare as humans understood it. It was genocide disguised as a military operation. And if the galaxy's so-called civilized species were capable of this level of brutality, then humanity needed to know exactly what they were dealing with. The hegemony advance continued throughout the day, with soldiers using flamethrowers to clear suspected hiding spots, chemical weapons to force Vorthans out of sealed shelters, and something the humans had never seen before: neural disruptors that caused excruciating pain before death. The aliens seemed to take pleasure in the suffering they were causing, stopping to inflict additional torment on wounded survivors before finishing them off. As the sun set over Xerion Prime, casting long shadows across the devastated landscape, the human observers had documented 12 hours of continuous atrocities: mass executions, the destruction of clearly marked medical facilities, the use of banned chemical weapons against civilian populations, and the systematic torture and murder of prisoners who had attempted to surrender. Corporal Davis, positioned near the main cave entrance where many Vorthans had tried to find safety, watched as hegemony engineers sealed the openings with explosives, trapping thousands of civilians inside to suffocate slowly in the darkness. When some managed to dig their way out through secondary passages, hegemony soldiers were waiting with plasma torches to burn them alive as they emerged. "How many do you think made it into the deep caves?" asked Private Johnson, a young soldier who had joined the unit straight from basic training on Earth. "Not enough," Reeves replied, watching as hegemony troops brought up heavy drilling equipment to reach the deeper cave systems. And from the looks of it, the hegemony isn't planning to leave any of them alive. By the end of the second day, the hegemony forces had achieved total control of Xerion Prime. The official reports would list it as a complete military victory with minimal coalition casualties and the successful elimination of all rebel resistance in the sector. What the reports wouldn't mention was that virtually every living being on the planet had been systematically murdered, regardless of age, gender, or combatant status. Reeves and his team had recorded over 40 hours of footage documenting every aspect of the massacre. They had captured evidence of war crimes that violated every treaty and convention that governed warfare between galactic civilizations. More importantly, they had documented proof that the species humanity had been trying to cooperate with were capable of atrocities that made Earth's darkest historical moments look restrained by comparison. Sergeant Major called Specialist Torres from the communications station.
Hidden in their command bunker.
We're receiving orders from Earth Command. All recordings are to be transmitted immediately via quantum burst, maximum encryption. What about extraction? Asked Martinez, who hadn't slept in 36 hours and was clearly struggling with what she had witnessed. Reeves checked his orders again, reading the encrypted text carefully. We maintain position until the hegemony fleet departs. Earth Command wants us to document the aftermath as well. What they documented over the next 3 days was equally horrifying. Hegemony soldiers spent their remaining time on Xerion Prime, methodically destroying anything that might serve as evidence of what had occurred. Bodies were vaporized, buildings were leveled completely, and even the planet's geological features were altered to remove signs of the mining operations that had made the world valuable. When the hegemony fleet finally departed, they left behind what appeared to be a lifeless world that had suffered some kind of natural catastrophe. Only the human observers knew the truth about what had really happened to the 50,000 beings who had called Xerion Prime home. As the last hegemony ship disappeared into hyperspace, Reeves gathered his team for extraction. The soldiers who boarded the human transport were not the same people who had arrived on Xerion Prime 3 weeks earlier. They had seen something that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives, and they carried with them evidence that would change humanity's relationship with the galaxy forever. "Sir?" asked Private Martinez as their ship left Xerion Prime's orbit. "What happens now?" Reeves looked back at the planet through the transport's viewports, seeing nothing but a scarred and empty world where a thriving civilization had existed just days before. "Now," he said quietly, "the galaxy learns what happens when someone forces humanity to choose between staying silent and staying human." Deep beneath the Pentagon, in a briefing room that officially didn't exist, Admiral Morrison sat at the head of a polished metal table surrounded by the highest ranks of Earth's military command. The room's walls were lined with quantum-encrypted displays showing star charts, fleet positions, and, most importantly, a continuous stream of footage from Xerion Prime that made even battle-hardened veterans struggle to maintain their composure. "Turn it off," said General Patterson, a man who had fought in 3 interstellar conflicts and thought he had seen everything warfare could produce. His face was pale as he watched hegemony soldiers use plasma torches to execute wounded Vorthan civilians. "I've seen enough." Admiral Morrison nodded to her aide, who mercifully switched off the main display. But the images continued to play on smaller screens around the room, a constant reminder of what humanity's supposed allies were capable of when they thought no one was watching. "How much footage do we have in total?" asked Colonel Hayes, the Pentagon's chief intelligence analyst. 47 hours of high-definition recording from multiple angles," Morrison replied. "Everything from the initial orbital bombardment to the final cleanup operations. Sergeant Major Reeves and his team documented it all just as ordered." The room fell silent except for the hum of air circulation systems. Everyone present understood the implications of what they had witnessed. For 2 centuries, humanity had been trying to integrate into galactic civilization, accepting their role as junior partners and learning from species they believed were more advanced and civilized than themselves. The footage from Xerion Prime had shattered that illusion completely. "The question," Morrison continued, "is what we do with this information. We have undeniable proof that the Hegemony Coalition, the military arm of the Galactic Council, is systematically committing genocide against any population that opposes them. This isn't aberrant behavior by rogue units. This is official policy approved at the highest levels." General Patterson leaned back in his chair, his weathered face showing every one of his 60 years. "Do we take this to the Council? Present the evidence and demand justice?" "To what end?" asked Colonel Hayes. "The Council species we'd be presenting this evidence to are the same ones who authorized the operation in the first place. They knew exactly what the hegemony was planning to do on Xerion Prime, and they approved it unanimously." Morrison activated a new display showing casualty estimates from the Xerion Prime operation. The numbers were staggering. Over 50,000 confirmed dead, with no survivors detected anywhere on the planet's surface. The hegemony's official report lists total military casualties as fewer than 200 Vorthon combatants eliminated, she said. They're claiming the rest of the population evacuated before the assault began. Anyone reviewing the official records would think this was a minor skirmish against a lightly defended military outpost. The lie was so comprehensive, so carefully constructed, that Morrison realized it wasn't the first time the hegemony had done something like this. How many other minor military operations had actually been genocidal massacres disguised as legitimate warfare? What about our obligations under Earth's treaties with the Council? Asked General Rodriguez, who commanded Earth's home defense forces. We're bound by mutual defense agreements and military cooperation protocols. Those treaties, Morrison said grimly, were signed under the assumption that we were allying ourselves with civilized species who shared basic ethical principles about warfare. What we witnessed on Xerion Prime violates every law of war that humanity has ever recognized. She activated another display, this one showing Earth's current military capabilities compared to the combined forces of the Hegemony Coalition. The numbers were sobering. Humanity possessed perhaps 10% of the total firepower available to their supposed allies. In a direct confrontation, she continued, Earth's colonies would be destroyed within months. Our fleets would be overwhelmed, our cities would be glassed from orbit, and our entire species would face the same fate as the Vorthons. The room fell silent again as everyone absorbed this stark reality. Earth had spent 2 centuries building relationships with galactic civilization, integrating their economies and technologies, making themselves dependent on trade and cooperation with species that had just revealed themselves to be capable of unspeakable brutality. But, Morrison continued, we do have certain advantages that the hegemony doesn't fully understand. She activated a new set of displays showing detailed analyses of human military technology compared to galactic standard equipment. While human weapons appeared primitive by galactic standards, they had been designed according to completely different principles than the energy weapons and gravitic shields favored by older species. Our kinetic weapons, our chemical explosives, our nuclear arsenal, all of these technologies were abandoned by galactic civilizations thousands of years ago in favor of more elegant energy-based systems, Morrison explained. Their ships and armor are designed to deflect plasma beams and particle rays, not to stop tungsten rods traveling at relativistic speeds. Colonel Hayes nodded slowly. Their tactical doctrine is built around fighting other energy weapon-using species. They've probably never faced an enemy that uses projectile weapons in serious numbers. More importantly, added General Patterson, they've never faced an enemy that doesn't fight according to their rules of civilized warfare. From what we saw on Xerion Prime, the hegemony expects their enemies to surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They don't know how to handle opponents who fight back with everything they have. Morrison stood and walked to the main display, bringing up a tactical analysis of the hegemony fleet that had participated in the Xerion Prime operation. 200 ships, 50,000 troops, all arranged in perfect formations that showcased their technological superiority and military discipline. The hegemony fleet is still in the Xerion system, she said. They're conducting cleanup operations and preparing to establish a permanent garrison on the planet. Supreme Commander Zarthok is personally overseeing the operation from his flagship. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone in the room understood what Morrison was suggesting, even though no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Admiral, said General Rodriguez carefully, are you proposing that we take military action against a council species? Morrison turned to face the assembled officers, her expression grim but determined. I'm proposing that we send a message. The hegemony and the council species that support them need to understand that there are consequences for what they did on Xerion Prime. More importantly, they need to understand that humanity will not stand by and watch while genocide is committed in the name of galactic civilization. What kind of message are we talking about? Asked Colonel Hayes. Morrison activated a final display, showing the positions of Earth's newest fleet, the Hansen Squadron, 12 ships that had been developed in secret using technology that the hegemony had never encountered before. Unlike the rest of Earth's fleet, these ships had been designed specifically to fight energy weapon-using opponents, incorporating stealth systems and kinetic weapons that could punch through shields designed to stop plasma beams. We're going to show them what happens when someone forces humanity to become what we're capable of becoming, Morrison said. The Hansen Squadron will intercept the hegemony fleet at Zarion Prime and deliver justice for what happened there. And after that? Asked General Patterson. Once we've attacked a council fleet, there's no going back. We'll be at war with the entire galactic civilization. Morrison nodded, understanding the weight of what she was proposing. That's why this has to be perfect. We get one chance to show the galaxy who we really are when someone crosses a line we can't ignore. The message has to be clear, undeniable, and so overwhelming that no council species will ever consider testing us again. She paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected her own mixture of determination and dread. Prep the Hansen Squadron for immediate deployment, she ordered. Full stealth approach to Zarion Prime, with orders to engage and destroy the hegemony fleet. And get me Ambassador Chen on a priority channel. She needs to know what's coming because after this, she's going to have to explain to the entire galaxy why humanity just declared war on civilized society. As the officers filed out to carry out their orders, Morrison remained alone in the briefing room, staring at the tactical displays that showed the positions of fleets across dozens of star systems. In a few hours, humanity would cross a line that could never be uncrossed, revealing themselves to be something far more dangerous than their galactic neighbors had ever imagined. The footage from Zarion Prime continued to play on the smaller screens, a constant reminder of why this was necessary. 50,000 beings had died because the galaxy's civilized species had decided that genocide was an acceptable tool of warfare. Now they were about to learn what humanity considered an acceptable response. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos, with delegates streaming into the Great Chamber amid a flood of urgent communications and conflicting reports. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked calmly through the confusion, her expression serene despite the storm of activity around her. Behind her, technicians wheeled in several large holographic projectors that they began setting up around the central podium. The chamber buzzed with worried conversations in dozens of languages as delegates tried to make sense of the fragmentary reports coming from the Zarion system. Long-range sensors had detected massive energy signatures consistent with a major space battle, followed by complete communications blackout from the hegemony fleet. No one knew exactly what had happened, but the implications were terrifying. Order, called Council Speaker Thymel, his crystalline voice cutting through the noise. This emergency session will come to order. We are here to address the crisis in the Zarion system and the apparent loss of contact with Supreme Commander Zarthok's fleet. As the delegates settled into their seats, Ambassador Zekthera of the Hegemony Coalition rose from his position, his forearms trembling with barely controlled anger. Honored Speaker, we demand an immediate explanation for the unprovoked attack on our forces. Our preliminary report suggests that an unknown fleet engaged our ships without warning or justification. Chen stepped up to the central podium, her technicians finishing their setup of the holographic equipment. For the first time since the session began, the chamber fell completely silent as every delegate turned their attention to the human representative. Honored delegates, Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. I come before you today to present evidence of war crimes committed by the Hegemony Coalition against civilian populations on Zarion Prime. What happened to the Hegemony fleet was not an unprovoked attack. It was a measured response to documented genocide. Gasps echoed through the chamber as delegates absorbed her words. General Vextar jumped to his feet, his bark-like skin crackling with indignation. How dare you accuse the Hegemony of genocide? We conducted a legitimate military operation against rebel forces, nothing more. Chen activated the first holographic projector, and suddenly the chamber was filled with a three-dimensional representation of Zarion Prime's surface. The image showed the planet as it had been before the Hegemony assault, a thriving world with cities, farms, and mining operations scattered across its crystalline landscape. This is Zarion Prime as it existed 1 week ago, Chen said calmly. Population: approximately 53,000 Vorthons, including 22,000 non-combatants. 40% of the population consisted of children under the age of majority. The image shifted, showing the same landscape after the orbital bombardment. Where cities had once stood, there were now only smoking craters and fields of melted crystal. The transformation was so complete that many delegates had trouble believing they were looking at the same planet. This is Xerion Prime after the hegemony military operation, Chen continued. As you can see, the bombardment was not targeted at military installations. Schools, hospitals, residential areas, and civilian shelters were systematically destroyed from orbit. Ambassador Quill of the Centauri Federation shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The hegemony has always conducted its operations according to established military doctrine. Surely civilian casualties were minimal and unavoidable, given the nature of guerrilla warfare. Chen's expression didn't change as she activated the second projector. The chamber filled with footage from Sergeant Major Reeves's recording equipment, showing hegemony soldiers executing a family of Vorthons who had emerged from a collapsed building, carrying an injured child. The silence in the chamber was absolute as delegates watched the systematic murder unfold before them. The footage was crystal clear, showing every detail of the atrocity in high definition. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. They were watching hegemony troops committing cold-blooded murder against defenseless civilians. This footage was recorded by human military observers during the first day of the operation, Chen explained as more scenes of horror played across the holographic displays. What you are witnessing is not aberrant behavior by individual soldiers, but systematic implementation of a policy to eliminate all potential resistance through terror and extermination. The next sequence showed hegemony soldiers using flamethrowers to clear civilian shelters, neural disruptors to torture prisoners, and chemical weapons to force families out of sealed bunkers where they could be more easily executed. Each scene was more horrifying than the last, and several delegates had to leave their seats as the full scope of the atrocity became clear. Supreme Commander Zarthok, who had survived the attack on his fleet only because he had been aboard the heavily armored command ship, struggled to his feet. His silver skin had taken on a sickly pale color, and his forearms shook as he tried to formulate a response. This footage must be fabricated," he stammered. "No military force would conduct operations in such a manner. These images are human propaganda designed to undermine the legitimate authority of the Council." Chen activated the third projector, which displayed technical analysis of the footage showing timestamps, sensor readings, and verification codes that proved the recordings were authentic and unmanipulated. The footage has been independently verified by Earth's best forensic analysts. Every frame is authentic, recorded in real time by multiple independent sources, but the most damning evidence was yet to come. The fourth projector activated, showing communications intercepts from the hegemony command structure. The delegates could hear Zarthok himself giving orders to eliminate all potential resistance and ensure no future breeding population remains. "As you can hear," Chen said as Zarthok's own voice echoed through the chamber, "these atrocities were not the result of soldiers acting without orders. They were the deliberate implementation of a policy of genocide approved at the highest levels of hegemony command." The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates began shouting questions and accusations at each other. Some demanded explanations from the hegemony representatives, while others called for immediate investigations and sanctions. Through it all, Chen stood calmly at the podium, waiting for the storm to pass. Finally, Council Speaker Thaimal restored order, his crystalline voice ringing with authority. "Ambassador Chen, while these allegations are serious, they do not explain the attack on the hegemony fleet. What gives humanity the right to take unilateral military action against a Council species?" Chen activated the final projector, which showed tactical recordings from the attack on the hegemony fleet. The delegates watched in stunned silence as sleek black ships materialized from stealth fields around the hegemony formation, their forms unlike anything in the galactic databases. The attack itself was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Instead of the graceful energy weapon exchanges that characterized most space battles, the human ships unleashed devastating kinetic projectiles that punched through hegemony shields as if they were made of paper. The enemy ships, designed to deflect plasma beams and particle rays, proved helpless against simple tungsten rods accelerated to relativistic speeds. "Impossible," whispered Commander Thiss of the Aquatic Alliance. "No kinetic weapon could penetrate modern shield systems." "Your shield systems," Chen corrected gently, "were designed to stop energy weapons used by civilized species. They were not designed to stop projectiles fired by a species that you consider primitive and backwards." The footage continued, showing the systematic destruction of the hegemony fleet with surgical precision. But what truly stunned the delegates was what happened next. Human ships moving through the wreckage, carefully extracting survivors from destroyed vessels while simultaneously hunting down and executing every hegemony soldier who had participated in the Xerion Prime massacre. How did they know? Asked General Vexistar, his voice barely audible. How did they know which soldiers had been involved in the ground operations? Chen smiled for the first time since entering the chamber, and it was not a pleasant expression. We recorded everything, General. Every face, every voice, every soldier who participated in the genocide. Our artificial intelligence systems cross-referenced the orbital footage with the ground recordings and identified every individual involved in the atrocities. The final scenes showed human soldiers walking through the aftermath, methodically carrying out executions while carefully evacuating any hegemony personnel who had not been directly involved in the civilian massacres. It was justice delivered with mechanical precision, distinguishing between the guilty and the merely unfortunate with an accuracy that spoke of extensive preparation and planning. 200 ships, Chen continued as the footage ended, 50,000 personnel. The hegemony's most advanced fleet, commanded by their most experienced officers, destroyed in less than 4 hours by 12 human vessels that most of you would consider technologically inferior. She paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. The question before this council is not whether humanity had the right to respond to genocide.